Welcome to the virtual lunch. Today is Friday, July 31st, and is the 100th episode of the virtual lunch. Thanks to Case Point for being one of our two sponsors, the other being Level 2 Legal. I'm honored today that my friend David Lat is our guest. You're the founder of Above the Law. You're a managing director at legal recruiting firm Lateral Link, but how are you doing?
I've been doing really well. I feel very fortunate because we're now starting to hear about a lot of long-term effects that some folks who've had COVID are experiencing even after they've recovered. And for me, I'm in good shape, I think. I still am not back to my old self fitness-wise, but I don't have any heart problems, kidney problems, blood clotting problems, cognitive or psychological problems. So I feel very, very fortunate in the grand scheme of things.
Are you back to working full-time?
Yeah, pretty much. But I put that in quotes full time. I think a lot of us face these challenges right now of we're working, but we're also keeping an eye on our kids and schedules are kind of weird and it's different. We do miss this sort of collaboration and cooperation and gossip and what have you. I don't think I'm really held back by anything related to COVID. I think it's just a matter of the challenges of working during this pandemic and during the lockdown. Law firms did a really great job of transitioning to online, and so did many other folks in the legal space, whether legal journalists, legal recruiters, legal consultants. Hopefully the law, which I think has been in some ways a little bit of a stodgy profession and maybe a little more FaceTime focused than some other more maybe tech advanced professions, will probably move in this direction permanently. I've talked to a lot of folks whose bosses are now comfortable with them working online because they realize, wow, it's actually quite productive. You don't have the commute time. You do lose some things in terms of certainly collaboration, mentorship. You can't just walk down the hall necessarily and talk to somebody. I think we've learned some lessons about working remotely, about technology. I think we're more thoughtful about a lot of things. And I think those are all good things that are going to carry over to when this will be over. Statistically, I think the March through May period, year over year, was down about 70% for associates and 40% for partners in terms of lateral moves, according to now. But I've been seeing actually a surprising amount of activity, and I think it's going to pick up. Now, we all know about August. August is a very quiet month. But September, I think, as some firms start to go back and reopen on a partial basis, we're going to see a pickup. I've been talking to a lot of candidates in a lot of firms. Recruiting is still taking place. Many candidates have been interviewed remotely, and I even had one candidate start remotely, and he has yet to set foot in the physical offices of his new firm. Firms are realizing that we can't put things on hold forever. Now that we're more comfortable working online, firms are getting more comfortable. A lot of firms are actually doing better than they expected financially. I've been wrong enough about so many things that I'm very loath to make predictions. To that said, even if we haven't tamed the virus, unfortunately, even if we have to go back into lockdown in some areas, which we are seeing, the legal sector is at least getting better in terms of being able to work remotely. We're only going to get better at it. The technology is going to get better. Our management systems are going to get better. So in terms of the work side of things will get better, and I hope we have passed the worst.
David, you talked about how working remotely is probably that culture is getting more and more solidified. What do you think about legal tech and going cloud? Do you think that firms have finally embraced it and realized that that's the way to go, or the lockdown possibly going into 2021, or at least work from home for some firms? How do you see that? Did we finally hit the nail in the coffin for on-premise?
I think yes. It's so funny. I remember in the early days of the cloud, there were even ethics opinions. Is it ethical to store documents in the cloud? Now, honestly, is it ethical to not store documents in the cloud? To be keeping them in your physical offices, hard copy documents, they could go down in a fire, they could be stolen. Nobody's even physically going to your offices. It's much safer in many ways to have your documents in the cloud. So the days of sort of ethical hand-wringing over it seem to be over. And then in terms of technology, so many places are embracing technology, and it's really, really impressive. I do think that this was sort of the change that a lot of lawyers, especially older lawyers, needed to sort of push them into the sort of the next stage of things. You don't really have a choice. Courts are having hearings virtually. My husband, who's a lawyer at a white-collar boutique, had a sentencing done virtually. And what we're discovering, at least on the litigation side certainly, is thanks to all of this wonderful technology, things can be better, actually. You save on travel time. My question is whether clients will still want to foot the bill for going to a place for an on-site closing of a deal or arguing of a case when you could do it virtually.
Do you think that this is enough of a wake-up call for law firms to change their business model. With this being not just numbers, it affects lives. It has affected us in a human way. Do you think this is enough to say, okay, this short-term game, let's think about playing a long game now? What do you think?
I do think so. I think this is going to force law firms and lawyers to innovate, and I think that is good. Take the billable hour, which is one of the oldest traditions in the law, and I think in many ways not super efficient. The predictions of its demise have been going on for years, and it's still quite durable. But before the Great Recession, it was, I think, around 10, 12, something percent of maybe legal spend among major corporations. A couple years after the Great Recession, it's now something like 20, a little bit north of that. So it basically doubled. Something like that is something that we'll see again. I think it'll continue to increase. Now that clients are discovering all of this great technology, they're going to want some changes from their lawyers. And they're also going to see the possibilities. And they're also going to wonder, well, I'm using this great technology at my company. Well, why aren't you using it? This is going to lead to, and already is leading to, a flurry of innovation. Yes, it is true that the other professionals at law firms have seen more cuts than lawyers. We at Above the Law have always also tried to stick up for staff as well. We've had assistants to lawyers reach out to us and say, thank you for covering our field, because the partners are, less abusive to us because they don't want to wind up on your website. I wrote a piece for the Washington Post about my experience on a ventilator. I wrote a piece for Slate about my $320,000 hospital bill. I wrote a piece for the Los Angeles Times about what it means to be recovered from COVID. And I've also written Above Law too. So I've been trying to do a lot of writing about COVID, writing about its effects on the legal profession. And I'm thinking about some nonfiction projects, but I've had like a lot of different sort of incarnations. Sort of my first incarnation was dutiful, diligent, type A lawyer. I graduated from Yale. I went to clerk on the Ninth Circuit. I worked at Wachtell Lipton. And then I worked as a federal prosecutor and assistant U.S. attorney in New Jersey, which is where I'm from originally, under Chris Christie. So that was a very traditional, successful legal path. But then it was when I was in the U.S. attorney's office that I started this blog under a pseudonym. The blog was called Underneath Their Robes. And it was essentially a sort of news and gossip blog about federal judges, focused all on their personal stuff, not on their jurisprudence. Sounds kind of bizarre, and it was, but it developed a following among judges and clerks and even some justices at the Supreme Court. And over about a year and a half of doing it anonymously, it grew and grew. And eventually I revealed myself as the writer of it. It was this big controversy. I almost got fired from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I shut down the blog, and he said, look, you're doing good work as an AUSA. Let's just go back to the way things were. So we did for a while, but then I kind of found I really missed the more creative aspects of writing. And so I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I moved down to D.C. and worked for a time at a politics blog called Wonkette. I discovered I liked writing, but I just missed writing about the law, which was really my area of expertise. And so that was around the time that I started Above the Law in the summer of '06. People are working, but there's more flexibility. If you want to take an hour of the afternoon during a time when you'd normally be in the office and work on a project and then make it up at some other point, like you can kind of do that. Nobody's sort of checking in on you necessarily. There's more flexibility in terms of when you work, more flexibility in terms of where you work. So if you want to have sort of something you do, like a side hustle, I guess as the kids call it, that you kind of do on the side, this is a really good time to actually explore that.
I got a follow-up to that, Ari, actually segueing into the individuals, the attorneys out there finding themselves in this time to kind of, branch out. And so much of law has always been about reputation and, spending those long hours in the office and word of mouth. Some ideas around marketing oneself within whether they're employed or not.
It is and it isn't a good time to actually reach out to people. I think that when you read Ari's work, one theme that sort of you take away is, look, like you have to kind of create your opportunities and you have to try new things and you have to reach out to people you don't know and, do stuff like that. And in some ways it's a bad time because you can't meet over coffee or drinks or a meal. On the other hand, it's very hard to say no to a meeting these days. It's like you're home all day, so why not take this meeting? It's a good time, I think, for people who are willing to take the initiative and create their own opportunities. It's kind of been nice to actually see people's families, even though in theory, some people are sort of shocked, like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing, my child is wandering onto my Zoom. But I have found it actually very humanizing to kind of realize, what, the people you're dealing with professionally, there's a lot going on in their lives too. And I think it's just made us more empathetic, understanding, flexible. And we've also adopted some good habits during this time that I hope will continue.
I just want to say that I interviewed Joey Sieber, who is the CEO of Level 2, which is one of the sponsors today. And at the end of our interview, he said, things are going to get better. And I thought it was a very powerful point, and I feel like you're amplifying that with us today. I want to say thank you especially to Case Point and to Level 2. David Lat, everybody.
Yeah.
Well done.